Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending. We're going to get started in just another minute. We're going to give everyone time to get onto the webinar. Okay. So everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be discussing project-based voucher applications and rental housing with Service Priorities NOFO. The first hour is going to be the project-based voucher training. This is primarily for developers of tax credit tax credit developments. And so if there are additional people with additional needs on the call, that's great. We can help address those later. And I know Laura Ann and Ryan may have some additional information on that. And then we're going to talk about the NOFO for service priorities afterwards, probably at about noon. And so this is recorded. It's going to be put on our DCA website in order to help y'all access this for, to re-review if you need to or need to leave early. And so now I'm going to turn it on over to Laura Ann, and just be sure to keep your microphones on mute. And also, we're going to go ahead and be answering the Q&A while y'all are participating. So I'm going to stop talking now, hand it over to Lorianne, hand it over to Ryan, and thanks so much.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Laura Ann Holland. I'm DCA's Director of Housing Policy and Special Projects, and we're really excited to talk through some resources for properties today. If you are a resident that is interested in our voucher program, a resident that's interested in potentially living in a project-based voucher unit in the future, or a resident that has housing needs, unfortunately, today is not the right webinar to focus on residents. This is focused primarily on properties and developers. We will be making public announcements in the future about properties that are opening waitlists, but at this time, we're not making those announcements and we don't have further information to share. If you're in immediate need for housing assistance, we are happy to connect you with some of our partners who will be maybe better suited to provide you with some immediate resources. And I am including in the chat the best email for you to send those questions to about what is available for you today. So just wanted to go ahead and flag that for folks who might have joined the call thinking this was something different. You're welcome to join and learn about what qualifications properties receiving our resources have to go through and what that process looks like, but we'll not be focused on resident-oriented questions today. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to pivot us to talk a little bit about the context for combining these two webinars and trainings. So this year, our teams have been really intentional about trying to better align the capital resources that we have to be able to better serve residents and provide resources to properties to do so. So we've been really thoughtful about that in alignment so that we've got more options along the housing continuum. And as the folks who are interested in applying for the rental housing NOFO with service priorities know, that notice of funding automatically comes with an application for project-based vouchers, right? And so it made sense for us to do these two webinars together so that folks that are interested in that capital resource for construction don't also have to attend a separate webinar. And so hopefully you are appreciative that we are trying to respect y'all's time as well in attending these webinars that we do. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ryan Smith. He is our Director of Program Governance and Client Relations for our Housing Choice Voucher team, and he is going to provide an overview of our project-based voucher program and this upcoming competition for vouchers.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Laura, are you controlling the slide? Never mind. I see it. Good morning again. I'll share my screen. So as Laura mentioned, my name is Ryan Smith. I'm the Director of Program Governance and Client Relations, and alongside of Laura Holland, we manage our PBV portfolio, and we're driving the initiative to expand the portfolio. So today we'll go over our projected timeline, some of our jurisdictional information and our extended jurisdiction information, the process overview, scoring criteria, and some other good details to help those of you applying. All right, so alongside of Laura and I, we also have Quandell Grimes, who I believe today will be his first introduction to the community as our housing portfolio administrator. He will be the central point of contact for questions, for guidance. He'll help lead our scoring of the PBV applications, and so much more built into his role, but he is here for questions. He'll help us man the chat as well today. All right, so project-based vouchers. Most people I'm sure on this call are familiar with our project-based voucher program, but to give us some context, project-based vouchers are very similar to the housing choice voucher. The largest difference would be that the subsidy is tied to the unit rather than to the tenant. So with housing choice voucher, tenant-based rental assistance, tenants can kind of move around from unit to unit or jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and their subsidy follows. With project-based vouchers, they are tied to the assisted unit. As families move on, the assistance will remain for the next family to take advantage of. With project-based vouchers, rents are set at the property. However, 30% of the household's income is what we use to determine what their rent portion will be. The housing assistance payment will cover the difference directly to the landlord. Yeah, and basically these are units that are set aside specifically for eligible residents or applicants who qualify for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The three relationships that we're highlighting in this example here, we receive our funding directly from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The landlord or the property will have a relationship directly with DCA, which is governed through our HAP contract. The resident will have a relationship that's governed through our tenancy addendum and technically the voucher. And then, of course, the landlord and participants relationship is governed through the lease. All right. Here are a list of ways that the project-based vouchers can help properties. Consistent payments. So with economic hard times or family hardships, their income may fluctuate. The voucher is there, the assistance is there to keep the rent stream consistent to the landlord. Supplemental operating revenue. The opportunity to layer with other financial tools such as low-income housing tax credits and many others. And then, of course, improving the affordability options for the community, expanding the affordable housing stock. All right, so DCA has a jurisdiction that covers 149 counties. So these 149 counties that are not white striped on this map, those are covered by other PHAs. The green and the yellow counties represent where our tenant-based subsidy lives. historically, that was our full jurisdiction of where we could administer project-based vouchers as well. We have the authority over all 149 counties to administer all of our assistance from the Housing Choice Voucher Division. Through a lot of work and outreach, a lot of conversations, we've entered a few new jurisdictions, which we'll cover later in the presentation. But this kind of gives you an idea of what we cover. We do have 2 regional offices, one located in Atlanta, the other located in Waycross, Georgia, where most of the operations is handled. However, all of the relationship for the PBV contracts will be handled out of our Atlanta office. All right, so qualifying units. Units for this program do have to pass housing quality standards. As we move into the Inspire world, Inspire will be implemented in place of housing quality standards. I'm sure many people are used to the HQS inspection template. Inspire is a more inclusive inspection type that covers all of our affordable housing types. Kind of eliminating the need for multiple inspections for the multiple streams of assistance for these properties. Of course, the units have to be in line with our subsidy standards, so we'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. Our subsidy standards are part of our administrative plan, pretty standard across the board for most housing choice voucher programs. So we're looking for units that can accommodate our subsidy standards. And then, of course, we are looking for properties with at least 15 or property applicants with at least 15 units that make up no more than 25% of a property. If more than 25% of the units on a property are requested for PBVs, supportive services are required on the property. High quality applications from owners and developers in good standing with DCA will be considered for a waiver of the 15 unit minimum on a case by case basis. There are some smaller properties that do offer excellent housing options for our constituents. Those considerations will be made again on a case by case basis. All right, so currently, DCA's HCV program has just over 17,000 vouchers in our budget authority. We are striving to increase our utilization of those 17,000 vouchers. And PBV was one of the clearest ways to meet our utilization goals to house the maximum number of families. 20% of our voucher allocation can be used for project-based vouchers, which is equivalent to about 3,500 vouchers being set aside for PBV. As of February, this month, we're just over 1,690 PBV commitments, or those that are actually already under contract, making up about half of what we can allocate in the project-based voucher portfolio. This is over a 700% increase of our portfolio since Laura and I started this initiative to expand the PBV program for DCA. So an additional 10% can be project-based, specifically for supportive housing developments, equating to about 1,700 units. So that's kind of the backstory and a little our high-level overview of what our PBV program is and a little history about it. For the 2025 application, we have some new considerations that we wanted to cover, and it'll be covered in 5 different categories. So we have our new dates and expected timeframes, the updated competitive scoring criteria, our jurisdiction expansion, partnering with our neighboring jurisdictions, the additional information that's required as part of the application, and guidance for the file structure in our application submission. All right, so these dates are they're fluid in the sense that we're more so shooting for the week that these dates fall within, as opposed to those actual dates. So some of it may come sooner than the date that is on that you'll see on this slide. So this week, we released the electronic solicitation of the 2025 PBV application round. Today is our virtual information session, which, as stated before, will be posted on our website later this week. By next week, we will we'll have our publication of information session and QA posted for review from everyone on this call, as well as others who didn't have the opportunity to attend today. All right, so the dates that matter most to those of you interested in applying for these vouchers. April 18th is the due date for existing properties to submit their applications for the competitive round. Applications are due by 5 p.m. Our goal is to evaluate within 30 days, have our commitments by the end of May, commitments sent out. The due diligence and tenant eligibility period would be between May and June, and then we can have contracts executed as early as the end of June. For the new construction, we are looking at a March 31st, 5 p.m. deadline. Evaluations will follow immediately upon receipt of those applications. We plan to have the proposal selection completed by April 11th, giving the month of May space for the due diligence period. And then in line with the existing housing, we're looking at contract executions occurring as early as June, the end of June. All right, so the updated competitive scoring criteria for properties who have not received housing tax credits within the last 3 years. So 40 points would be for the occupancy and the availability date, 20 points for project size and supportive services, up to 10 points for property location, and up to 30 points for unit composition, which we'll break down on the next slide. All right, so for occupancy, for those who have the opportunity to lease in place, you can score up to 40 points for the lease in place option. For those that are placed in service with near occupancy, I guess, dates, we're looking at about 20 points. And for those who don't meet either of those, there'll be no points awarded for those applicants. So if leasing in place, applicants must include a summary of selected units and complete initial eligibility packet for the households in each proposed PBV unit. Those applications will be provided to everyone who is awarded the PBVs. All right, so for the size of the units, the size of the award, for 50% or more of the units, which would go for those who have supportive services on site, 20 points would be awarded. Same for the next category, 25 to 49% of the units would be 18 points. 15 to 24% of the units, 15, 10 to 15%, 10, and 1 to 9%, 0. And then composition is bedroom size. So for more than 50%, 3 bedrooms on the application, 30 points. More than 50% of 1 bedrooms would be 15 points, and then all others would get 5 points. All of this information is on the solicitation, broken down into detail. Sometimes it's easier to read it in the application form, but it is available in our solicitation. And then lastly, 2 points per benefit location-wise. So property provided transportation network for residents, nearby access to public transportation, nearby access to groceries, access to health, social services and schools, and access to local employment centers. So the third category is additional public housing authority partners, and increased partner allocation. So DCA will award up to 25% of our allocation, of our PBV allocation, to properties located within our partnering housing authorities jurisdictions. That's up to approximately 890 vouchers. The areas where we've established MOUs outside of our jurisdiction are listed on the screen. So Albany Housing Authority, Atlanta, Augusta, Brunswick, DeKalb County, Marietta, which covers Cobb County, Savannah, and we will continue working towards establishing more MOUs with interested partnering jurisdictions who would enter an MOU with us, authorizing us to administer project-based vouchers in their area. All right, so additional information required with the application. The rent reasonableness and rent comparison study form in Appendix C. This is just showing that your units are being rented comparable to unassisted units in the area. Same unit size, structure size, similar to when it was built, and amenities provided. A tenant selection plan that includes the property's waitlist management preferences, including whether they will manage a general lottery-based or referral-based waitlist. And if it's referral-based, what referral partners will be, they'll receive referrals from. And then if it's not a tax credit property or no longer in the tax credit compliance period, properties must complete new documentation for determining financial feasibility, which also is covered in our solicitation. And then lastly, we've provided guidance for file structure and application submission. So the 3 pages that are highlighted here, I don't expect you to be able to actually read it. It's all part of the solicitation. This is our actual PBV application. Following this application and its structure also provides some insight on how to submit the application. And there's details included in the solicitation on exactly what to submit to ensure that your application is complete and ready for review. I've included a few slides, 2 slides of resources on where how our program's governed, where the rules and regulations come from, and there's also in the solicitation references with a little bit more detail on exactly what rules come from where. PBV is written in 24 CFR 983. Of course, our DCA administrative plan, the most current copy, will always be available on DCA's website. And a few other resources here, again, also mentioned in the solicitation. And I'm going to hand it over to Laura to cover our award timelines a little bit more in detail.
Thanks, Ryan. And yeah, happy to answer any questions after this, but wanted to go ahead and give a heads up because I know we've probably got different property types on the call. So if you're seeking a preliminary commitment for the housing tax credit application round, either the 9% round or the upcoming 4% round this fall, you will have a different timeline for our team's review than if you are an existing property, including existing properties that are tax credit properties. So if we are prioritizing our preliminary commitment and new construction reviews, so that application, of course, as Ryan previously mentioned, is due on March 31st. And we will be reviewing those applications the week of April 1st and the week of April 7th. So our goal is to get you guys those commitments by midweek April 7th. We understand that things are moving really tight for our housing tax credit applicants, and so we just want to be transparent around when you can expect those commitments to be made for your housing tax credit application. We will plan to do any kind of due diligence that's required for any new construction properties. So those are properties that have not yet started construction but have received a tax credit award in a previous round. All of that due diligence will be done in May with expected AHAP execution starting in June. If you are an existing property applying, including if you are an existing housing tax credit property, we will be reviewing your applications after the preliminary commitment and new construction applications. So those applications will be reviewed in April, late April and May, and we plan to make an announcement about applicant selection in May, and the due diligence required will come after that. I think you'll see if you've applied in the past for tax or for project-based vouchers that we're requesting a lot of information in the application this time that previously had delayed our due diligence process. So we anticipate that the due diligence process is going to be able to move a lot more quickly in terms of being able to lease in place and get wait lists started and have your rents finalized. So we expect that those initial contracts for existing properties will start being executed this summer around June. All right. It looks like we've got a question in the chat from Oscar already, and we'll open the floor up for other questions. The first question from Oscar is, are projects located within a housing authority jurisdiction ineligible if there is no MOU? So DCA is the housing voucher administrator for 149 counties in the state. So even if there is a local housing authority in many of those communities, those housing authorities typically provide public housing resources to residents. But DCA is still the housing choice voucher administrator in those areas. Where the exception is the map that Ryan showed, right? And Ryan, can we go back to that slide to show the map? So in these counties, and in a few cities, small cities like Carrollton is one of them, and then Americus, a couple others, they actually run their own voucher program. But these are the areas from the map that Ryan is putting on the screen where we do not have authority without an MOU signed. And so if you look at this map, right, we've got MOUs signed with DeKalb, with Cobb, with Savannah, with Albany, with the city of Atlanta, and with Brunswick and Glenn County. And so there are those other areas where we would not be able to operate are, of course, the city of Carrollton, Muskogee, Bibb, and Fulton County. And Clayton County, excuse me. Will this be the only PBV RFP before the next 4% LIHTC submission deadline of 10/3/2025? Brandon, that is a great question. It's all dependent upon our own commitments and how much of our allocation we commit. I will say that last go round we committed close to 1,000 units, and if we anticipate we've got another successful round, it could be that same amount or more. So if you know enough about your project now, I would encourage you to go ahead and apply. There is no promise that we'll have either the voucher allocation or the staff capacity to be able to run another application round. Okay, Reed, to confirm if we're applying for the upcoming 9% round in May 2025 and the property will be new construction, can we still apply for these vouchers? And if so, we then will be given a commitment around mid-April. Yes, so Reed, if you are interested in applying for these vouchers as part of your housing tax credit application, The deadline to apply is March 31st, and we will make the commitment in the second week of April. So I know that's a super tight turnaround, but our team is ready to move really quickly on those reviews to get those commitments made to you guys. And we've reallocated the review workload so that we'll focus on those first to get them done. I will say we've covered this in past webinars, but if you're a new developer who hasn't previously applied for project-based vouchers, but is a housing tax credit developer, we use our housing tax credit competition as the competitive part of our project-based voucher application. What that means is that HUD allows us to not make you guys go through like multiple competitive rounds with different requirements in order to have resources for property development. And so if you are applying for a housing tax credit application, you have different documentation requirements than other properties that are not going for a housing tax credit competition. So please pay attention in the solicitation on what you actually need to submit. And don't waste time if you are doing a housing tax credit application submitting competitive documentation that we won't even review because it's not required. Tab, how are rents for PBVs determined? SAFMR or county MSA-FMR? Also, if a property has units with rents less than either SAFMR or MSA-FMR but comparable to the units covered by PBV, will the PBV rent paid be capped at the highest rent charged at the property? Ryan, will you explain our payment standards and then I'll explain our rent comp process?
Yeah, so effective January 1st, DCA has adopted 100% small area FMR. So it's down to the fair market rent set by HUD at the zip code level. So it varies, of course, all over the state. We also adopted 100% of the payment standard as our of the fair market rent as our payment standard. So in previous years we ran at 110%. We've recently adjusted to 100% to stay in line with our goals of maximizing our reach across the state. For the second part, do you want me to answer the second part of the question, Laura? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ryan. You answer that part.
Okay, so if a property has units with rents less than either, but comparable to the units covered by PBV, will the PBV rent paid be capped at the highest rent charge of the property? So yes, you are unable to charge higher rents for the assisted units versus the unassisted units, if I understand your question correctly.
Yes, you will, and I think the other piece of that, Ryan, is so we've got the payment standard, right, Tab? So like this is the maximum rent we can pay in that area, which is both an MSA and a small area. It just depends on the area where that is. And then we've got the next step, which is determining the rent comps, right? So we won't automatically give a property a payment standard, like the payment standard max. We have to do a rent comparison and determine what, other similar rents are based on the quality of the unit. So there's a two-part piece there for actually determining what your final rents are. Ronit asked if the previously awarded projects that haven't closed yet are eligible to apply. Yes, that is what we consider a new construction property, Ronit. So those properties also do not have to submit in our competitive application, but can submit in our just the other general application like our preliminary commitments do. So you can actually find that information at the very beginning of our NOFO. So I think I shared the link in the chat, but you can find out what documentation you have to submit based on what property type you are on page 2 of the PBV guidelines and competitive application. Okay, Tab is the next question. I think if we're supporting housing, what AMI? Oh, if we're supportive housing, what AMI should we set PBVs at if we're choosing income averaging? So Tab, I am not sure what your project specifically looks like. I think it depends on the population. So if you are serving veterans in a supportive housing facility, our AMI goes up to 80% on our veteran program. If you are supporting other individuals, the majority of people served in our program are at 30% AMI, but can go up to 50% AMI. So I think it's a project specific answer, and I hope the information I've provided has helped you enough to answer it for your project. Um, okay, Tab, I might need you to come off mute to chat through this because you said so DCA allows up to 110% SAFMR, but PVV rents will be capped at the highest comparable unsubsidized unit of the property. No. So uh so we PBV rents go up to our payment standard. So we will not award a property a rent higher than the maximum payment standard in our portfolio. The second piece of that is that we do a comparison of other properties in the area, right? So we have a payment standard that we operate on based off of all sorts of different data, but we also look at other similar rental units when deciding the property specific rent, and that is based off of basically like a market analysis. Hope that helps. And Tab, if you've got like a more specific project question, we'll follow up with you on this these additional income averaging details. Okay, hi Rory. Page 9 of the RFP states in the event that DCA receives more applications for units from 2022 to 2025 LIHTC properties than its allotment, DCA will not be able to make preliminary commitments to future tax credit properties or awards to other existing properties. How does this marry with the due date for existing property applications and the review calendar for preliminary commitment applications? Yeah, so great catch of the details of our RFP. We did not flag this in the webinar because we don't anticipate this happening, but in the event that we get a lot of new construction properties that want our PBVs up to the remainder of our total allocation, which is close to 4,500, including the supportive housing units, then we would not be able to make commitments to existing properties, and we would not make preliminary commitments. Based on the demand that we have seen and what we have typically seen in our LIHTC portfolio, we do not anticipate that happening during this application cycle. Hope that helps, Rory. In the event that it does, however, if every property that was awarded from 2022 to 2025 comes in and requests all of their units to be project-based vouchers, then it makes Ryan and Quan and I have a lot easier job, and it also would make us not make awards to other properties. Any other questions from folks? All right. So if you do have questions that come up after this time, right? We will plan. So, Alona, I don't think we talked through this step, but if we could use the same form stack link to get PBV questions, that would be great.
Oops. Sure. Oops. That sounds great. We can go ahead and do that. So,
yeah. So could somebody drop that in the chat so that if folks have outstanding questions,
I'll do that right now.
Awesome, thanks. And then I see we have one from Craig Taylor about being previously denied because the PHA did not have an MOU, and now the MOU has been signed. Yeah, so Craig, the only thing we've got an update to the PBV application. We just require, if you're running a referral-based wait list, to actually have information on who your referral partners are going to be. So if that's the case, just check out that part of the application and make sure to include that when you resubmit. If you've got any like unit number changes, then we'll need a new application. For everyone, if you are resubmitting from a previous round, will you please just resend the email and let us know that you're resubmitting, and that way we can make sure that we keep a fresh list of, everyone that's applying. All right. Okay, we'll pass it over to Alona and team to talk through the rental housing with service priorities NOFO, which is for both our home qualifying populations and our single site supportive housing construction financing. So if you've joined this call to learn about project or place-based vouchers, and you're not interested in the construction financing, you can leave the call now. But if you are interested in construction financing, you can stay on. So the PBV part of the conversation is ending. If we get any other questions, we'll make sure to include those in whatever we post as public comment. Thanks.
And we just put the form stack up for y'all to ask questions on those project-based vouchers. Also, if you would like to put any additional questions about project-based vouchers in either the Q&A or the chat, we will get back to you. Will Laura Ann, will you and Ryan be able to stay throughout this? Great. Okay, so we'll be moving on then. So additional housekeeping, like we've stated, this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube page, or is being recorded, I should say. And the PowerPoint will be available as well and linked to the NOFO page later on this week. Please ask questions throughout. The best way to do it is just to raise your hand or to use the chat. The training will end at 12:30. But we will continue to review questions throughout the survey, and that actually closes on the 28th. So if you have any additional questions for the NOFO, your last day to submit those are going to be on Friday the 28th. So if you have not read through the NOFO, you probably should do that soon. So then that way we can make sure to get back to you. We just need enough time before the due date on the 14th of March to review all of your questions and to answer them, so that way you have enough time to review those and get back to us. Following the close of the Q&A, only questions or concerns related to an application submission, mechanics, and emphasis will be considered. And any application submission or tech issues only, please email me. So then that way we can go ahead and take care of those for your application submission. So we're going to be going ahead and going through the overview, each of the parts, the general set aside, and then any post-award requirements and attachments. So projects awarded under this NOFO will be eligible to receive a low-interest loan, a favorable financing letter of support to be used in conjunction with this year's rounds, either 4% or 9%. I guess I should say 9% or 4%, considering the timing, and an allocation of project-based vouchers through DCA's Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is what Ryan and Laura Ann just talked about at the beginning of the session. So here is an overview of the two options for the NOFO. And then we will be, again, giving those favorable financing letters. Given the loan minimums in the NOFO and the QAP parameters, applicants should apply to receive the maximum favorable financing points possible under the QAP. And the project-based voucher submission can be done alongside the application submission with the NOFO. And it is attached to the appendix of the notice of funding. So most jurisdictions outside of DCA have agreements with DCA, as Ryan went ahead and gave you all a full list of what those jurisdictions are. And you must have an MOU with a local referral agency for each population referred to use a voucher, as long as it's above that 25% limit like they had talked about. The eligible applicants must intend to use any award under the NOFO in conjunction with the tax credit program. The LIHTC application must encompass the same project as the NOFO award. We will not be awarding at this time HomeARP or National Housing Trust Fund funds outside of the tax credit program. Applicants must thus be able to apply for tax credits and be determined to be a qualified certifying entity in conjunction with their LIHTC application. And all of the applications must be turned in by March 14th for the 9% tax credit round for those qualification determinations. Performance workbook for project team qualifications is currently available. And eligible activities are new construction, acquisition, and/or rehab of affordable rental housing. And see Part 1 and 2 of the NOFO for the specific activities, which we're going to talk about. Each applicant may only submit one application for review under this NOFO. They must choose which funding source that they're applying for. DCA will evaluate each application to determine the feasibility of usage of the proposed funding in support of the respective programs. DCA reserves the right to utilize the resources listed and/or additional DCA resources, if available, to maximize loan efficiency. Applicants must be compliant with DCA's development and management requirements, be in good standing with the Office of Housing Finance, of Office of Portfolio Management, and the Office of Community Housing Development regarding any tax credits or home National Housing Trust Fund properties or other federal funds, and any DCA and GHFA loans. A lot of information. So just to an update from our last webinar, the 2025 QAP documents have been released. That includes the performance workbook, the housing tax credit application. The 24 or 25 versions of the performance workbook will be accepted with your application. And you must submit the performance workbook separately for both the NOFO and for the tax credit round. So just know that you would just have to resubmit it for both, either if you do the NOFO and then also for your tax credit application. These are the submission requirements. And by the way, those that are highlighted and underlined, you can actually click on those and they should come up for you in on your browser. Please note that if you are new to applying for tax credits and using emphasis, you will need to register for a new account. And so please see the tax credit application manual for instructions. And now we're going to talk about service enriched affordable rental housing, our part 1. It is for acquisition and new construction as well as rehab. It can include the developer fee as well. Funding requirements are for 15 years for HomeARP. We do serve 4 qualifying populations: homelessness, at risk of homelessness, households fleeing domestic violence, and human trafficking, and other households experiencing great risk of housing instability and possibility of returning to homelessness. And project-based vouchers that you hopefully will be applying for will be used on these units. Those budget considerations, we went into detail in the last training on these particular areas. If you have any further questions, you really should reach out to us through the survey or even at this time, especially regarding 70-30 rule. And any HomeARP funds budgeted for developer fee is permitted development cost under the Home Art program. However, DCA must review the fee and determine that it is reasonable. Okay. We also are offering optional supportive services, a minimum of $100,000 to a maximum of $500,000. These must be spent by January 1st, 2030, because everything has to be spent by the September 2030. So we want to make sure that we get that accomplished beforehand. So please help us do that. So funding will be spent with Home Art qualified populations at the funded rental housing development. An MOU must be signed between the development and the service provider to provide services. And DC and the service provider will establish a written agreement. So it's between us and who you choose to give those services for the funding. And they'll be the ones that will actually disseminate all of the services. And then we would, their compliance would be with us and them and not through your development. Okay. And now I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about our single site supportive housing.
Hey, everybody. Also, Ilona, I'm noting there's a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if we want to address some of them.
We absolutely can. Which one do you want to start with first?
So Tab, you've put a couple questions in the chat. We'll try to take them one by one here. So the first one I see is, so we must include an MOU with a local referring entity at the time of application submission. What if one of our supportive housing partners isn't a local referring entity, but they will become a referring entity upon completion? So the requirement for the MOU for referrals is due upon the time of threshold submission. So that's not the initial NOFO application timeline, but assuming your project moves forward, is awarded in the NOFO, and then also moves forward with an application for tax credits and is awarded, then later, once we go through the threshold application requirements, during that process, that's when the MOU will be required for referrals.
However,
so I'm not sure if that's true for home ARP as well, but for the single site supportive housing, that part is included in the NOFO.
That is absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely true, John. We would, however, like to know who you're planning to contract with. So you don't have to have a formal MOU, but if you have some groups that you're considering to partner with, it would be great to include them in that service plan that we have as the accompanying document.
It looks like Laura Ann answered Jose's question about the PBV application timeline.
And you did the MOU for the single site.
So there's a question, is the PBV application required for a, I think Laura Ann, you answered that one as well. To qualify as a service enriched application, does the applicant have to serve only one or all four of the QPs in order to qualify for funding? That's a good one.
That's a great question, Brandon. At this time, you need to be open to serving all four qualifying populations. We've been very open that we are working toward getting limitations and preferences for those populations. But at this time, we don't have them. We're hoping that it would be ready for a time that a written agreement would be made. However, there should be somewhat of it could delay the final contract if you're waiting for a qualifying population to be approved. So it would be a timing issue. So my recommendation would be ultimately be prepared to serve all four qualifying populations. And if we get a preference or limitation, then we can activate that once that happens in your written agreement. You know what I mean? So if it would be an extra just bonus and shift if you're able to serve a more limited population upon your written agreement. I hope that makes sense.
The next one I see is, how is the larger developer fee calculated for supported housing developments? Yeah, that's a good one for you to submit in our Q&A link. We
We're
I can't
working
answer
through
that
that.
one right this moment, but we're working through it and we'll get an answer published for you.
We had a question in what was submitted, and so we're going to be putting that together for you. Yeah, Laura Ann has already answered that one. If supportive services grant is used to fund at reserve to be used to offset related expenses, does that mean the January 30th deadline? Okay, the supportive services will not be a reserve. It's going to be an active grant that they can spend from day one of the rental housing to January 30th, 2030. So it wouldn't be a reserve account to be operating after 2030. So it would be a full-on grant that they would be administering right away. So use that as a consideration. So it would be kind of like seed funding to get you started with having supportive services and giving you time to be able to find other funding after that 2030 date.
Oh, Alona, can I jump in on one of the follow-ups to tab two on the and I think Brandon had a similar question on how many of the QPs that we're serving. So we are completely aware, know of what some of our other state partners and even some of our other local PJs in the state of Georgia have done with their homework funding. At this time, the way our current allocation plan is written, all 4 QPs have to be served in rental housing. We have written our notice of funding in such a way that we are able to allocate funds across our different application parts, so part 1 or part 2, based on any future changes to that allocation plan. So for our developers interested in this funding source on the call, right, we are potentially going to be able to limit to QPs in the future, but all of those things are being run kind of simultaneously while accepting applications. So I say that to share at this time, under the Homework Part 1 NOFO, you have to serve all 4 QPs. There is also a Part 2 NOFO for serving a specific population group, right? So we may be able to make changes in the future if our allocation plan is updated and is approved. But the way the current rules are written right now, we cannot with our Georgia DCA allocation. If you would like to have a further follow-up conversation about that allocation plan, please email me directly offline out of this chat. Thanks.
Yeah. And we had a project-based voucher question with RAD. Can you please revisit this question? Is a project-based voucher application required for a RAD transaction that will have a project PBRA project-based voucher contract through a HUD on 100% of units? The PHA would not be asking DCA to be the administrator.
Then if DCA is not the administrator, then you don't have to have the PBV application as part of your NOFO. This is only for folks that want project-based vouchers through DCA's administration.
And then
So Ilona, I'm going to propose that maybe we get through the single site supportive housing slides and then get to, because the questions are flowing in now, and I just think we should just finish up the presentation and then we can continue on with the open Q&A.
That sounds
That
great.
work?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sounds perfect.
Okay, next slide, please. Oh, maybe I can do it. I can do it. Great. Okay, so Ilona described part 1 of the NOFO, and this is part 2, single site supportive housing. So for this housing type within the NOFO, the primary funding source is going to be National Housing Trust Fund dollars. We've allocated roughly $4 million within the NOFO towards trust fund money for single site supportive housing, subject to availability and DCA discretion. DCA, however, may allocate other funds, which could include home funds based on funding need towards single site supportive housing. But that will kind of depend on the level of application we receive, the level of need, and what we have available. So there's potentially some flexibility there. So our loan amounts are a minimum of $2 million and a maximum of $4 million. as required by National Housing Trust Fund regulations, there's a minimum of 30-year affordability period serving residents with a maximum income at 30% of the area median income. We're using the home cost allocation tool in terms of per unit subsidy limits, so please reference that. And then if you have questions about National Housing Trust Fund compliance in general, our compliance manual is linked there as well as on our website. And I'll go to the next slide. So for our single site supportive housing, we've identified several priority populations. So these are populations that we're looking to serve through this NOFO in part 2. I won't read them all. You can read them there. They're clearly listed in the NOFO as well. But these tend to be populations that are well served by permanent supportive housing. And so you may notice that the difference between trust fund and home ARP is that if you're using National Housing Trust Fund dollars, there's more flexibility to do supportive housing for populations that are not one of the 4 QPs or the 4 QPs under home ARP. So there's pros and cons with the different funding sources you may be trying to apply for, but with trust fund, there's a little bit more flexibility there just in terms of the populations that you could serve through this NOFO. However, if you're doing homelessness units, you must be going through coordinated entry for your referrals. So for project concepts and designs, these are referenced in both the NOFO and the 9% LIHTC general set-aside guidance. So just going back to September of 2024, we released some guidance that announced that DCA will be utilizing the general set-aside for single site supportive housing in the upcoming 9% round. So hopefully y'all saw that guidance because it will also apply to this NOFO. So the 9% general set aside guidance plus what's in the NOFO plus the underwriting guidance that was written should all be informing your project concepts. But in general, we want to see resident-centered approaches to both design and accessibility features. So many of y'all are probably on this call because you're familiar with supportive housing, but one of the most important parts of it is that you have a service provider partnership in place. The requirements are detailed in the different rating factor sections, as well as in the supportive services plan and budget template. And that's a document that's also on our NOFO website. So you can go to the web page, which I put in the chat earlier. Maybe someone wants to put it again in there. But you can download the supportive services plan and budget template and browse through what we're looking for in terms of your partnerships with a service provider. In that document, the budget tabs in the plan and budget template are used to describe the financial information that is expected by the service providers. So there's budget year 1 through 5. Those are all required tabs in that document. And so we need to be we need to have like a good sense of what the service provider budget is going to be for your project, so that we know that there is adequate funding going towards the service providers and adequate revenue coming in to be able to fund the services for at least the first 5 years. Service requirements are also referenced in the general set-aside guidance. So here is just a brief overview of what the underwriting guidance looks like that was also released with the NOFO. So this is specific to single site supportive housing. You'll notice that the operating expenses that you should be underwriting for are higher than our typical tax credit units are, that the QAP mentions or describes. So no less than 8,000 per unit and no more than 10,000 per unit. For replacement reserves, we're requiring that all developments must budget for and capitalize funding for replacement reserves at or before conversion in an amount that equals the total of 6 months worth of contributions. And then we're also adding a fixtures and furnishing reserves, which will be, applicants will be required to capitalize and fund this fixtures and furnishing reserves before conversion, which should be used for essential furnishings for new tenants that are in need of furnishing. You can use philanthropic resources, in-kind contributions to fund 50% of this reserve. So very briefly, I'll go through the general set aside. I kind of already mentioned it, but I would recommend that you follow the link that is on our NOFO webpage for the general set aside guidance to outline what our expectations are for the single site supportive housing projects that are submitted under this NOFO. One of the more important things to note is that described in the guidance is that DCA will select the two highest scoring single set aside applications. And so when you're thinking about like, how can I get the set aside, consider all of the points available to you, consider all the resources at your disposal, put together the most competitive single site application. And that is the primary criteria that we'll be using for that selection. And I think that's all I wanted to mention there.
Yeah.
And I'll pass it back to, maybe we can go back to questions.
Yeah, so we're gonna, actually what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop sharing real quick. And I actually want to show everyone on the website, because there was some questions around the supportive, the service plan. So just so then that way we show that. Okay, here we go. So here's the NOFO page. And so each of the sections, so part one, so here's the whole NOFO right here. The service enriched affordable rental housing section, so it's part one. This is the underwriting guidance, and then the service enriched properties service plan is right here. So this has all the tabs that are referenced in the part one of the NOFO, which includes the application for the optional supportive services. Then under the affordable single site supportive housing, this is part two. And this includes the underwriting guidance as well as the general set aside guidance, and then also the supportive services plan, budget, and template. If you all need to submit additional questions after this webinar, here's the Q&A form for you to access. Here are our responses. We're finalizing several of them and they'll be up within the next day or so. So this is where you will go to get more responses, especially around those developer fees. So thank you for asking that. And then here's the access to the trainings. This is the PowerPoint from the last training, and then the recording from the first training. And then this was the registration from today. So just wanted to make sure that you all knew how to access that. And that is on our NOFO page. So right now we're kind of going to be addressing those additional questions that we had come up. And
Alona, I've been going through in the chat and answering some while you guys were finishing the presentation. I think at this point, Sophia Pollock's question needs to be answered on when folks submitting under this NOFO should submit the performance workbook. And Sophia, I will answer your question about PBVs in the chat.
So the question, I'll just go ahead and say it for the recording. I just want to make sure I caught two of the comments that touched on one. We need that we touched on. One, we need to turn in the performance workbook as part of this NOFO submission in addition to the DCA submission for the round. And then two, if we were interested in applying for the project-based vouchers, we would do so as part of the NOFO application and not separate from the NOFO application or as a standalone project-based voucher app. So for the first piece, yes, we would like to see your performance workbook as part of this NOFO submission. And then additionally, you would need to turn it in a part of your QAP submission. The reason why we'd like to see your performance workbook is to get an idea of the other developments that you've had, specifically around supportive housing and any particular additional funding that you've worked with, because that helps with knowing that you'll know how to do the compliance for both of the programs. So that's a big reason why we wanted to see the performance workbook ahead of time. And then, like Lauren said, you were going to go ahead and address, she was going to go ahead and address number 2.
Alona, can I jump in real quick? Because John McKnight
Please.
has a question further down. Is the supportive housing experience supplement noted on bottom of page 8 of the NOFO a form document we are to complete or something we are to create ourselves? If form doc, where is it located? Sorry if I'm missing it. Hopefully I'm not misspeaking, but I believe we're actually referencing the performance workbook as the supportive housing experience supplement. And we may not have clarified that or updated that in the final version of the NOFO. So those are the same. The performance workbook and the supportive housing experience supplement are the same thing. So when you submit the performance workbook, you are satisfying the submission for the supportive housing experience supplement. We will clarify that in a Q&A, just so that there's no confusion about that.
Thank you, John, for connecting that.
I think we've got somebody's hand raised.
Linda, I'm going to go ahead and we'll take you off mute. Okay, I think you can just go ahead. You may just be able to take yourself off mute. Linda, you could unmute yourself. All I'm seeing is disable mic. Let me see. Maybe that'll work. Nope. That won't work. Allow mic. So Linda, you will have to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask us a question.
Laura, I don't think I have a. Are you talking to me?
Linda Brooks?
Linda Hagee? Oh, no.
Yeah, Linda, you had your hand raised. So we're just giving you the opportunity to speak. And you're on mute now.
You're going to have to unmute yourself in order to, okay. Okay, so we'll move on to, until Linda unmutes herself, we'll go ahead and answer any additional questions. Project-based vouchers. Are there any other questions that need to be addressed? And there was a question around
Were you
the
coming
amount.
off mute? I just saw you come up. I want to make sure to give you space to ask a question.
Go ahead, Linda.
All right, no
Okay.
questions in from Derek or Linda. We do have a question from Tab. I don't think I heard an answer about the place in service and timeline for supportive services spending.
Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and mention that. So Tab, you were not required to request the $500,000. You can request less than $500,000, because yes, everything does need. We can't put supportive services into a reserve account, so they will have to be expended by 2030. So, and that is by HUD's requirements. And so, what would have to happen is if you're placed in service in 28, then utilizing, I would budget out what you could spend by the time that you're placed in service to the end date for those particular funds, and then ask accordingly. So that would be that's what I would recommend for your request. And so you can request less than $500,000. You can request $100,000, which, depending on what you anticipate spending, may be the better ask. But it also is supposed to be seed funding. So the supportive service agency that you're working with should be working toward additional funding in order to address any additional services that may be needed after that 2030 date. Okay. See new messages. And beginning, so I'm able to go back to the meeting at the beginning.
I let her know we'll have the webinar posted on the website next week. So
Perfect.
she can find it there. And Sophia, I saw you have your hand raised now. If we could let Sophia ask her question.
You can go
Hey
ahead.
everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, first, thank you so much. This is providing a lot of clarification for me, but I just want to make sure I have all my facts straight here. If we're going to apply for the NOFO, then and we're going to request PBVs, it will be all done as one application. I think I understand that now. But if we have a project-based voucher application that we want that is not going to apply for the NOFO, that is coming at a different date, which is the 31st. So two different dates, right? The 14th and then the 31st.
Sophia, if let's say you've got 3 different property types. Let's say you've got a property that's applying for a tax credit that's applying for this NOFO. Your deadline is March 14th. Let's say you've got another tax credit application that isn't applying for this NOFO. That date is March 31st. Let's say you've got an existing property that you guys own that you want to apply for project-based vouchers on it for some supplemental income. That deadline is April 18th. So 3 different potential deadlines.
Great. So new construction project-based vouchers would be on the 31st then?
Yep.
Okay, great. I got it now. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good question. So Brock asked a question regarding MOUs with referring entities. Based on a discussion a minute ago, my understanding is that an MOU with a referring entity is not required at the time of competitive application. Regarding MOUs with service providers, my understanding is that an MOU with a service provider is required for HomeARP at the time of the competitive application. Is there an MOU requirement or point incentive for providing an MOU with an NHTF application? So, sorry, it seems like we've confused everyone. So do you want to take the NHTF piece first, John?
I can jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So, there is not so what I would point you to is the scoring criteria that we have for the NHTF, for the single site supportive housing section, under strength of project concept and strength of partnerships and services plan / budget. Further down on that, at the very bottom, talks about describe all partnerships included in your development team. Your narrative should include the duration of the partnership, formal or informal commitments to collaboration, funding agreements, etc. So there is not a specific written sentence there that says one way or another whether you will get more points for having the MOU in place, but your overall narrative and your overall application and what you have compiled with your team will be considered as a whole. So can't say that there's a specific point incentive for providing an MOU at the time of the application. Hopefully that helps. It's also kind of a vague answer, but that's as good as we've got for now.
Well, and I think to that point too, John, with regards to the HomeARP question that you asked, Brock, I think really what we want to know is that you guys are clear with who you're working with so that you've had a chance to plan. It's not that you're being proactive with what you're wanting to do. We understand that this is before your May application, and a lot of that happens like in the weeks beforehand. And so with your NOFO application, we just want to know that you guys, what your real plans are. And we understand that some of those will not be solid. So like John said earlier, if you don't have an MOU for sure with your service agency, it will need to be for sure by the time that we're asking for a threshold, which would be after you get that favorable financing letter. Okay, that's for one. For two, with regards to HomeARP, the written agreement, okay, that we're going to have directly with those supportive services agencies, that's going to be after basically you guys get through closing. So before you guys so that's basically the contract that allows you to administer those funds. So the MOU that you have with the agency and the written agreement we have with them are two separate things. And our written agreement with them is going to happen a good ways down. Just because you guys have to build a building first. And so before you start administering those funds, and so it'll probably be at probably 50% completion when we're wanting to sign on that for the written agreement on the dotted line. So that's a timing issue. And I'm sorry that the language was a bit confusing. So I hope that helps clarify some pieces.
Yeah, that's
Lorianne, do you have anything? Huh?
Sorry, I was just gonna say that's quite helpful. I think I was mainly concerned that we might not have like a full every last detail ironed out for the MOU, but I mean I think we'll have like high level structure, so that's quite helpful for us.
That's perfect. Yeah. And we just want to know that, like I said, that you guys are being proactive, that you are really thinking through all the logistics with this and giving us as solid numbers as possible. And when we start going through threshold and starting to, align everything, because we know that there's a lot to align here. Obviously we're going to want it to eventually get pretty solid, but we also know that we want you guys to be thinking about. So putting in legit service providers, it's really important too. So just make sure that you're completing the information as well. And then we also had a question, John, with the performance workbook from Oscar. The performance workbook includes all the properties for the certifying entity and compliance information, but it does not provide specifics about supportive services, which is true. What do you think is the best way to demonstrate this experience? And I mean, I would probably, the reason why we had the narrative is for you guys to really talk through what y'all have done. Is there any there's additional parts in the service plan too that should break that down a little bit as well. John, what additional pieces?
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, just consider the whole of your application, everything you're submitting, and complete each section to the fullest that you can, and we will consider the whole application when we're reviewing them.
Okay. Okay, and just a clarifying piece, we got a question in that isn't here. You know what? We'll do it through the Q&A. So we have an additional question. But so definitely, guys, we have lots of questions, additional ones for the Q&A. I know, Tad, you've talked around a few additional ones, as well as some others, including Brock. So if we haven't answered everything here, we definitely have the Q&A that's available through Friday. So are there any other questions right now? I'm kind of going back through and seeing if there's any gaps that we are missing. Go ahead, Brock.
Thank you. You saw me come off mute. I was just
you want to ask
wondering.
questions.
Yeah, I was regarding the senior. I think there was a slide in one of the previous presentations that talked about senior and some concerns around fair housing. My understanding was that if we can attest that there will not be discriminating based on familial, I mean, obviously on any protected status, but particularly on familial status is my understanding. If we can, confirm that we are not, if a senior comes in that's caring for their grandkid, for example, that there won't be discrimination in that way. Does that sort of, for NHTF and HomeARP, does that allay concerns potentially, or?
So let me clarify with that, and I'll do HomeARP, and then John can do, because I'm sure I know NHTF is going to be different. So just the reason for HomeARP is, I know if y'all choose to do elderly or housing for older persons locations, okay, I know that there are requirements regarding the individuals who can live there. It's based on an age requirement, not so much for housing for older persons. We know that there's a little bit of leeway with the 80-20 percentage pieces, but for 62, and I'm not sure if it's with the IRS tax code kind of thing with the 62 and older. I know it's pretty solid though that you have to have people living there who are 62 and older. I brought it up with HUD in the room and I said, what happens?
Alona, why don't we give Brock a formal answer through our public comment? I think that'll probably be more helpful.
Okay.
So that There's obviously
No,
we've been
just
having a
dog.
lot of conversations about this one, Brock. So we want to make sure to give you something that's going to be tangible for your application. So we'll get it out through our public comment.
Okay, okay, thank you
Well,
so
there
much.
you go, Brock. So,
Michael, what's up?
Hey, thank you for this webinar. This is really helpful. And maybe it's the same stance. If you prefer to respond to these questions through the formal Q&A, that's fine. But I just emailed and maybe it's something we can talk about now. Back to a RAD transaction, there's some language about the funds not being dispersed or expended until confirmation the units have converted from ACC to RAD. Does that mean that home ARP funds would not be available until post-construction, post-conversion? Is that interpreting right?
that's going to need to be answered through the Q&A as well, Michael.
Yes. And Michael, just to let you know on this one, this is also something that we've already flagged as a need for clarification from HUD, and we are currently experiencing delays in clarification from HUD. So we will do our best to get an answer to this in a timely manner, but it's dependent upon our HUD partners.
Okay, sure.
Just because,
Understood.
yeah, it's a very specific question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lorian.
And then on the 70-30 rule, just simply, is there any expectation or requirement that any of the units are not voucher units? Or let me rephrase, can 100% of the units be voucher units through a RAD conversion, PBRA, or PBV contract?
Ooh, okay, so the 30, okay, so let's break down the 70-30 rule, or do you want me to do that now? We have 3 minutes. I don't know if you saw the slide at the QAP workshop. It's 70% or more of the units need to be qualifying populations, 30% or less. Okay. The qualifying population block of units. So the entire development does not have to be like home ARP unless you really want it to be. So of the block of units, if you have 100 units and 10 of them are home ARP, 7 of them would be for qualifying populations, 3 for what would technically be considered like high home units. Those high home units, because of the requirements of, I think it's 50 or 80% that they have to qualify for, the project-based vouchers don't make sense on those units. They would mainly be for the QP units. Now, if you want 100% of your units to be QP units and put vouchers on them, we can do that. We can work that out. So that could be an option. The other thing, though, that you have to consider with RAD is the qualifying of the individuals moving into the unit. So like the relocation, so it would only really work for like a new construction, not a rehab necessarily, because if you're moving people out and moving them back in, they would have to requalify for the unit under home ARP. And that would mean homeless, at risk of homelessness, and they're already housed, and they're housed at 30% of their income. So they wouldn't necessarily even qualify for a home ARP unit if it's not new construction. If it is new construction, it's completely different because they're not requalifying for a unit that they're moving back into. Do you know what I mean? Does that all make sense, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. But even in the
Okay.
instance where it's a demo and new construction, you're pointing out kind of a fundamental issue that are these tenants that are locating into the newly constructed units, they're likely not a qualifying population.
So yeah, they have to be a qualifying population. They have to be homeless, at risk of homelessness, those, and if they're coming from a, so that's why RAD is a little questionable. It does mention it in the notice, but like I said, as Laura Ann mentioned, we were checking with HUD and that's been delayed. So we can get you those answers. I'm also going to check with Kim Golden, who has a rad background, and so we were going to kind of see if we can make it through and kind of see if there's a way to put something together, but we're in the midst of figuring that out. So
Okay, thank you.
yep, you're welcome. Well, it's 12:30. I think we're done with all the questions. As John stated, the form stack is noted in the chat. We will take all of these questions that are in the Q&A and make sure that they're posted as well, everyone. And we just appreciate your time and all your great questions. John, anything else you have to add?
Nope. Thank you
Okay.
all.
And I know Laura Ann checked out real quick, so so if you guys need anything else, just go ahead and reach out to us through the Q&A, and we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to all your applications in a few weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.